With this session update, I'm Shannon Lurkey. Yesterday was the self-imposed deadline for legislative leaders and Governor Tim Walz to reach an agreement on general budget targets for the 10 budget areas. They began meeting early, and following their discussion, they met separately with the media. Here's what they had to say around noon yesterday.
Just a quick, brief update. Things are positive. We're getting a lot of work done. We'll be back at 2:15 to dive in depth in the HHS budget, and we have to go to the floor.
Is there a commitment to get the targets yet today?
We're all still very hopeful, and we'll be working hard through the day.
Well, good afternoon. We continue to negotiate with the governor and the House. It is respectful, which I think is important. We're actually communicating, I think, clearly and openly as far as where we each stand. There is a fundamental difference that we're trying to work through. They basically build a budget from the bottom up. In other words, whatever each area wants for spending that they think is important, they build into the budget. And then after that, they raise whatever taxes are necessary to get there, which is about $4 billion a year, not counting OneCare. So $12 billion over basically $4 billion a year is approximately what it is. And so that's the difference between where they're at and where we're at. Is we build a budget with the resources that we have. It happens to be a 5% increase. So that's a little over $2 billion is where our budget is, and we take that number and then we work down and prioritize about what is most important for Minnesota and what is it that maybe we don't need to do or can do differently. And so there are two different directions. I wish we were on the same page on that, but we're not. And so we continue to work through what is that number that we can agree on the top. We're hoping to get that number by tonight, but regardless, we're going to keep working towards a solution. That's the good news for Minnesota, is we're all working together towards a solution that we think is in the best interest of Minnesota.
Mr. Leader, are you expecting any numbers on budget categories or simply an overall spending number at the end of the day today?
So the question related to budget categories versus overall spending, the big numbers fit into an overall budget number. And so that's why we really think it's important that we have an overall number before we agree to any of the bigger budget numbers. That would be HHS, that would be E12 spending in particular, two really large ones. And so this has been some very good conversation about reform and where do we want to head and best practices, and all of those are really, really good. I'm saying let's make sure we take care of the fundamentals. Don't miss the things that we must get done, that all of Minnesota think we need to get done. Let's make sure we get those in this short period of time that we have left. And then whatever else, other things that we can agree to, we'll do those as well.
So the three of you are going to talk about details, not just overall numbers for each category. How deep are you going into?
Deeper than I thought. We've actually talked pretty in depth about K-12 and higher ed and health and human services, but in the end, I really want the chairs to do their work working with the commissioners. That is different this year. There's a lot more conversation between the chairs and their committees and the commissioners. I think both the governor, the speaker, and myself want a lot of work to be done there, and so that's how it is.
Where does the gas tax figure into all of this? I know it's not necessarily a budget item, but I know it's going to be one of the hang-ups.
The gas tax is not going to happen. We've made it very clear that that's not where we need to be. Transportation is moving forward. We have $530 million more money into transportation this two-year cycle than last, and so we have a plan going forward for that. I've also hinted that if we do some roads and bridges bonding money, I'm open to that as well. And so we're open. The Senate Republicans are open. Our goal is to make sure that our roads and bridges are funded properly, that the potholes are fixed. I think that's the governor and the speaker's desire as well. And so I think we'll get to the end, but we've just said gas tax is one of the few things that we've drawn a strong red line and saying we're not going to do that.
Did you say that directly to him, and what was his response?
I didn't say that today or yesterday, but I have said that, yes, to the governor.
A larger bonding?
How does it feel in there? You're the only person who's done this before kind of in a row.
It feels like deja vu. The difference is different players. Governor Walz is different from Governor Dayton. They both have different styles. They're both passionate. They both love Minnesota as much as I do, but it's definitely different. And Speaker Hortman is very pragmatic, wants to try to find a way through as well. And so that's why I'm confident we'll get something done for Minnesota. But just like all the other ones in divided government, it won't be easy.
Mr. Leader, on transportation, are you willing to go on with a somewhat larger bonding bill than you originally had talked about?
There he goes, trying to negotiate for me, so no comment.
Well, one of the things the Democrats are trying to undo is the dedication of auto-related sales tax revenue to transportation. So
Yeah,
there's no gas taxes that are off the table too.
Right. We worked very hard 2 years ago to provide new money for roads and bridges, and that was half the sales tax on auto parts. That's where that new money comes in now, and so to get rid of something that took 10 years across Republicans and Democrats disagreeing to actually get done, I think would be a big mistake to take it away. And so that's why we're fighting for so strong for that. Nobody's been able to do it until 2 years ago. That's new money moving forward, and why would we take that away?
Thanks for joining us. We're certainly open to taking questions. We've been working as of last week and have now in our third meeting of setting down, trying to make sure that we are investing in the Minnesota that Minnesotans want, a place where all children get that quality education, where health care is affordable and the outcomes we're getting are the best in the nation, and that every community is prosperous. And we're looking for the next generation of not trying to look just for tomorrow, but how do we make sure we make a sustainable investments, whether it be in water infrastructure or whether it be in those community parks that local folks, if given the resources, can make the decisions. So certainly open for some questions.
How's the feel in there? What's the tone in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's really positive in terms of there's a cordialness. I think the relationship building and the trust that we've tried to build over this session is something that Minnesotans expect. I talked about it having been through a statewide election in all corners of the state. One of the things that people said over and over and over again, the idea of working together for the betterment of Minnesota is something that's really important to them, about try and find a place where you can agree on things.
Governor, Senator Gazelka just said very bluntly, a gas tax increase will not happen, and he does not want to take that money that's now being diverted from auto sales tax away, because it took 10 years to get to that point. Your response?
Well, again, no is not a plan. As we said again, their plan invests no new money into transportation above what the base is that's there. It lets us fund one new road project as opposed to the 500 and the long-term generational change. Minnesotans are very clear that they want to have safe roads, bridges, transit to make a difference. They want us to think about and plan for the future. And I proposed a sustainable, solid plan to try and get there. But as I've said, and this is a big difference, I said I'm willing to work with them. I'm willing to talk to them about how we get there, because I'm talking and walking them through how we did our budgeting based on evidence-based budgeting, based on best practices from Pew Research, and coming up with this idea that we set our budgeting targets on what Minnesotans needed. What would it take to make sure that the special ed cross-subsidy doesn't drain off from our schools? What would it take to keep the 4,000 pre-K spots, not plus them up, but keep them flat with knowing that the return is massive on that? What would it take to give school administrators like in Rochester, who are waiting for us to get this done, the resources necessary to deliver that high-quality education? They, when I ask, how did you come up with your number, don't tell me, because it is an arbitrary number that they've set ideologically. And so this idea on, no, we're not going to do this, they have to answer the question, how do the resources that you're proposing, and no scenario that they put out, does it keep pace with what Minnesota needs to do to keep a high-quality, safe transportation system? So that is an ongoing discussion.
Governor, feel right now that you will have budget targets by the end of the day, according to this agreement that was...
I think these things are fluid. We'll see. Our goal is to try and do that. I think some of the disappointment on our side comes from the stymied debate that should have happened publicly in the conference committees. These should have organically came up. And I tell you this, is we're in there. The House is at $900 million in investments on E12. We're at $700. The Senate is at $200. Now, for me, it's a challenge, because I'm trying to ask them, what's your number? Where's a number between 9 and 2, and see how we can live with that? And I can't get an answer. And what I said is that I have to assume that number is higher for you, because your chairwoman in the Senate said it needed to be higher. So how come we can't start talking, where does that look like? So I'm a little bit, I think the problem lies in, I can give them a number. I'm not quite sure the Senate one senator can go back and speak for those other 35 who seem to be sending a different message about their targets. And so we're asking them to go back to them. We're asking them to allow the conference committees to continue to work. Listen in public what this means. Listen to what the three proposals mean, what they look like for Minnesota in terms of the outcomes for their lives, and look like what the fiscal numbers look like because of that. That's the part that's not really happening. And I think that's the frustration I've had for the last 4 months, that the healthy discussion that should have happened in large conference committees and Senate floor votes didn't happen. So at this point in time, I'm still trying to get them to say where you're trying to get to and why and how, because I think it's really important that they've said they're going to put $200 million into E12. Not a single school district has supported them that was there. Not a single piece of the evidence that I put in front of them on evidence-based budgeting supports the position of where they put their money. So why did you decide to cut all the pre-K slots? Is it because you believe it'll make Minnesota a smarter, better prepared state? Do you believe it's going to save money? Because the evidence base shows it will do neither of those things. It will do just the opposite. So I'm still a little bit, we got time, but that's a sticking point.
Governor, how do you agree on numbers? How do you agree on numbers if you can't agree on revenue source? Is it impossible to set targets if you're not agreeing on revenue and taxes behind those targets?
Well, I think they go about it the wrong way. I think you need to set about what are the necessities, what you need. When I'm doing a house budget, if I know I need a new water heater, I go check what it costs. If I know I need new windows, I'll go check what they cost. If the water heater is the priority, you buy it first, you wait for the windows, and you put that in there. There is none of those things went into the budgeting because I know they set their numbers by just coming up with a zero revenue, and then everything went from there. And then when they threw that out to their chairs, the chairs had to say, well, we know this isn't the real number, it needs to be higher. So your question is well taken. That's what I keep asking for. What does that look like? And when there's an unspoken discussion happening that they are predicating their numbers on the reinstitution of the provider tax, while at the same time simultaneously saying they're not for the provider tax, even though they're predicating their numbers on that it came back in, that makes it a little bit apples to boulders discussion. So that's a part that's still happening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Governor Walz and leaders continued their discussion into the evening when both sides offered proposals with the goal of reaching agreement. Governor Walz's proposal, to which the House agreed, would reduce net spending by $200 million while continuing the 2% health care provider tax and maintaining his transportation proposal, which includes raising the gas tax. The Senate's offer increases their funding for E12 education by an additional $200 million, paid for with savings to be found in the Health and Human Services budget. The Senate proposal would maintain current law by allowing the provider tax to sunset at the end of the year and maintain current mechanisms for funding transportation.